The sun had barely risen over the base hospital, its pale light catching on the frost that clung to the flagpoles. Sergeant Morelane stood at the gate with her duffel slung across one shoulder, discharge papers folded tight in her fist. Her limp made every step sound heavier than the last, boots scraping concrete like echoes of the war she wasn't finished fighting. Around her, whispers followed, soft, cutting, full of pity. Some said she froze during the ambush. Others said she cost her unit their lives. No one asked her for the truth. She kept her eyes straight ahead, jaw set, refusing to let the rumors see her flinch. The wall of honor loomed beside the walkway, rows of polished faces immortalized in glass. She slowed when she reached the space where her squad's photo used to hang, the outline faint against the sunlight. Her gloved hand lingered there, tracing the absence like a wound that would never heal. The bass loudspeaker called out morning drills, life moving on without her. Then came the low growl of a jeep. A general stepped out, his medals catching the light. Their eyes met for a moment, his expression unreadable, haze guarded. He turned away, leaving her alone at the gate, the wind tugging at the corners of her papers. Mara squared her shoulders, took a breath that trembled, and stepped into the cold morning, unaware that the path she thought was ending had only just begun. 6 months earlier, the desert night had been alive with gunfire and static. Sergeant Morelane, once a decorated field medic, had moved through chaos like she was born for it. Steady hands, calm breath, the kind of soldier others trusted when everything went wrong. That night, everything did. Her unit, Echo 9, was caught in a narrow valley during extraction when comms failed and flares turned the world white. Through the blinding light, she heard the cry of a downed man, Corporal Finch, hit and bleeding out 20 yards ahead. The order came sharp over the radio. Fall back. Leave him. But something inside her refused. Without thinking, she sprinted into open fire, bullets shredding the sand around her. She reached him, dragged him behind a smoking Humvee, patched his wound, and got him on the last bird out. The cost was brutal. 3 soldiers lost, Mara hit by shrapnel that tore through her back. Days later, while she lay in recovery, the report came in cold, mission compromised by disobedience. The footage showed only fragments, her breaking formation, chaos erupting. The nuance, the courage, lost to the noise. Finch died in transit, taking her defense with him. Her commendations were quietly revoked, her name erased from the after-action praise. By the time she was flown home, her uniform bore no insignia. Friends who once called her Doc Lane now crossed hallways to avoid her. Her family sent short messages, kind but distant, as if shame were contagious. Every night, she replayed that ambush in her mind, searching for the moment she could have chosen differently. There wasn't one. What burned worst wasn't the pain in her spine, but the knowledge that her finest act of courage had been rewritten as failure. And for a soldier, there was no heavier sentence than silence. The town she returned to didn't look like home anymore. The old factories still coughed smoke into the sky, the rail lines still screamed at dawn. But for Morelane, every sound carried the hollow ring of something lost. She rented a small room above a mechanic shop and spent her days staring out the window at the nearby airfield, the same kind of base she'd once flown from. Pride had turned to necessity, and necessity didn't ask about past ranks. When a custodial job opened in one of the hangars, she took it without hesitation. It was easier to scrub floors than explain scars. The younger recruits barely noticed her at first, just another civilian with a limp and a faded patch she refused to remove. Then came the whispers, how she watched aircraft with too much focus, how she moved like she still belonged. One afternoon, a loud-mannered corporal named Hayes laughed as she passed, muttering, "Careful, the ghost medic's on patrol." The others snickered, unaware of how close they stood to the edge of shame. Mara said nothing. She just kept pushing her mop, steady and slow, until the sound of their laughter faded under the hum of engines. Each night, when the hangar emptied, she stayed behind, drawn to a rusted medevac chopper slated for decommission. Its shell was stripped, windows clouded with dust, but she knew the shape of every rivet, every scar. She'd flown its sister model through hell once. Standing beside it, She could almost hear the heartbeat of the past, the shouts, the wind, the weight of the wounded against her knees. The work crew joked she was haunting it, but for Mara, the aircraft was the only place that didn't look at her like a ghost. When the commander complained about her unauthorized overtime, she simply nodded and returned to work. They could take her title, her rank, even her pride, but not this small space where memory and metal still remembered her name. In that hangar, among tools and silence, she began to feel something she hadn't in months. Not hope, exactly, but the faint, stubborn pulse of purpose. The storm came without warning. Wind roaring down from the hills, rain hammering the tin roof of the hangar until it sounded like the sky was collapsing. Most workers had already gone home, but Mara stayed, mop in hand, finishing her shift by the old medevac chopper. Lightning flashed through the high windows, throwing white veins of light across the floor. As she bent to wipe away the oil pooling beneath the aircraft's belly, something metallic caught the edge of her rag, a faint glint buried deep inside a maintenance panel. Curious, she crouched lower, fingers searching through grime and rust until they brushed against a small round object wedged tight. It took effort to pry it loose. When it came free, it was heavy, cold, and caked in black grease. She wiped it clean with the sleeve of her shirt, and a breath caught in her throat. An emblem, not standard issue. This one was hand-engraved, the surface worn smooth by years of touch. The words barely visible under the date read, Echo 9, leave no one. For a moment, the hangar disappeared. The storm outside became the storm inside her memory. Gunfire, smoke, the screaming rotors of a bird trying to lift off under fire. This was the aircraft, the same one that had pulled her and two wounded men from the burning valley. Her hand trembled as she turned the emblem over. On the back, faint but still legible, were the etched initials, CR Captain Reeves. Her CO, the man who'd ordered her to fall back, then vanished trying to save the rest. She sank to the floor, rainwater dripping from the ceiling, tears mixing with grease on her face. All this time, she believed a defiance had doomed them, when in truth, Reeves had overridden the evacuation logs to save her. He'd sacrificed himself in the chaos, ensuring the bird would take off before the ridge collapsed. The after-action reports had been wrong, the official blame misplaced. The truth wasn't lost, it had just been buried under metal and mud. She pressed the emblem to her chest, feeling its weight settle into her heart like a promise. When she finally stood, her reflection in the aircraft's window looked different. Worn, yes, but no longer broken. The storm raged outside, but inside, something steadier had begun to rise. That night, Mara Lane made a vow. She would see their honor restored, even if the world had forgotten their names. 3 days later, the base woke to the kind of mourning that demanded perfection. Flags were raised, brass buttons gleamed, and the hum of last-minute polish filled the air. The hangar Mara attended was at the center of it all, chosen to display the newly restored aircraft fleet for the visiting general's inspection. She'd worked late every night preparing it, wiping every smudge from the floor until the cement shone like glass. The morning light spilled through the hangar doors, catching the silver skin of the old medevac chopper she had quietly restored. The emblem she'd found now rested on its nose, cleaned and reattached, gleaming like truth remembered. Mara kept to her corner, sweeping as officers buzzed around, their clipped voices sharp with ceremony. Then came the sound of boots, measured, deliberate, commanding. The general entered, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, his uniform immaculate. His presence carried the weight of decades. He passed Mara without a glance, surrounded by aides and the base commander, who spoke too loudly in hopes of favor. When the general reached the medevac, he paused mid-sentence. The sunlight struck the small emblem, throwing a glint across his face. His expression changed. Slowly, he crouched, fingers tracing the engraved words, Echo 9, leave no one. The room stilled. He looked up, voice low but firm. Who placed this, hey? The commander rushed to answer, waving dismissively toward Mara. Just the janitor, sir. The general lifted a hand, silencing him. His gaze turned fully on her now, studying her with an intensity that stripped the room of sound. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, the same name from a file he'd once signed, the one that ended a soldier's life in silence. "Sergeant Mara Lane," he said, quietly, the words half memory, half reckoning. "Where did you find this?" Mara's grip tightened on her broom, but her voice was steady. "Right where you left us, sir." The words hung heavy, cutting through the polished air like truth through ceremony. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The general straightened, eyes glistening not with authority but with something closer to regret. And for the first time in years, the silence around her wasn't filled with shame. It was filled with listening. Silence gripped the hangar as every pair of eyes turned toward Mara. The broom slipped from her hand, landing softly on the polished floor. In a voice that trembled only once, she told them how she had found the emblem, buried in the aircraft's frame, its words still legible through years of grime, and how it had led her to the truth. She spoke of the night her squad was ambushed, how Captain Reeves had stayed behind to guarantee her evacuation, and how his last act had been to rewrite the mission log so she would survive. The general listened without interruption, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the ground. Then he gave a single order: reopen the archives. Within hours, the buried report surfaced. Reeves' final transmission, time-stamped minutes before the valley collapse. His words, scratchy through static, filled the hangar's speakers. "Medic Lane is securing the wounded. She disobeyed to save them. If anyone makes it home, it's because of her." The recording ended in silence, so deep it felt sacred. The general removed his cap, his voice roughened by regret. "We owe you more than an apology," he said. "We owe you the truth." Around them, the same recruits who had once mocked her now stood motionless, shame written across their faces. Cameras flashed quietly, not for headlines, but to document a correction long overdue. The commendation Reeves had earned was restored posthumously, and the one stripped from Mara was placed back in her file. The commander who dismissed her lowered his eyes. The general saluted, slow, deliberate, trembling at the edges. Mara's shoulders lifted, her stance firm. For the first time in years, she felt her spine straighten under the weight of something lighter than duty, vindication. The wind outside rustled the flag, carrying through the open doors like the echo of her squad's promise: leave no one. In that stillness, she understood. She had never been the failure. She had been the survivor who carried their honor home. Weeks later, the wind swept gently across the base memorial, carrying the scent of rain and the faint hum of distant engines. The names on the granite wall gleamed freshly carved, sunlight catching the new lines. Captain Reeves. Echo 9. Sergeant Mara Lane. Beneath them, the space once blank was now whole again. Soldiers gathered quietly, their chatter replaced by reverence. The general stood beside Mara, his hand resting on his cap, voice low as he invited her to speak. She shook her head, her eyes soft with something deeper than pride. Stepping forward, she knelt and placed the emblem, the one she had cleaned, held, and carried, at the base of the monument. Her whisper barely reached the crowd but lingered in the air all the same. No one was left behind. The words seemed to ripple through the silence. The young recruits behind her stood straighter, some swallowing hard, others wiping at their eyes. For them, she was no longer a rumor, no longer the broken soldier. She was proof that truth endures, even when buried in metal and time. The camera would fade on that moment, the emblem gleaming against stone, the flag rippling above, as the narrator's voice carried softly. Sometimes the bravest soldiers carry scars no metal can show. But honor, real honor, always finds its way home. Then, the familiar closing line: if you believe truth deserves to be remembered, watch what happened next at Fort Ember. From silence to legacy, her story finally rests in peace.